And I have to say, I think if Biden phones up Scholz and if Blinken speaks to Baerbock and Habeck, I think more likely than not they'll fall into line and they'll do something which will take Europe down even further. But we'll see. For the moment, the Germans are trying to push back, but place no reliance on it because, as I said, we've seen this happen before. We see the Germans talking about what a bad idea SWIFT disconnection was, and then they cave.
Yeah, from what I understand, the Americans import something like 3 or 4% of their oil needs from Russia. You gentlemen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe it's around that figure. I mean, very, very low, but still something that could affect you. But the point is that the Americans can, with some alacrity, cut off Russian oil, and it will hurt, but not be a complete end of the world scenario for them.
No.
And so perhaps out of some misguided notion that, it doesn't hurt us that bad, so you Germans should do the same as us, they'll push the Germans to this brink. And I don't think that the German economy would survive cutting off Russian oil.
No. Russian oil, Europe imports a quarter of its oil from Russia. And this is a tight oil market. There is no replacement for it. I mean, even Maduro can't come to the rescue there. I mean, it just can't be done. And besides, I mean, I'm not an expert on oils, but, you can't just substitute one type of oil for another. You can't replace Arabian Light with Urals crude. It doesn't work like that. So, but if they do that, if they switch off a quarter of their oil supply, which these people are, I think, capable of doing, because, as I said, they never think these things through. Then, as you correctly said, it will be a disaster for them. But sanctioning Russia's central bank, cancelling Nord Stream 2, and de-swifting some of its key banks was already a disaster, and they did it.
You guys are talking. This is a great conversation, and you guys are talking a lot about oil. But can both of you address some of the other commodities and the other resources? Because I think Russia has stressed the fact that this is going to be an asymmetric retaliation, and we kind of saw a hint of that with the JCPOA and Lavrov's statement with the JCPOA saying, "You know what? I might nuke the JCPOA if we can't, trade with Iran." In a much broader sense. And I thought that was an interesting asymmetric position that he took. We have wheat, we have metals, we have fertilizer, there's travel. I mean, what do you guys see as far as some other ways that the Russians may retaliate in an asymmetric manner?
Please let me respond to this, because I've given it some thought. I've done a little bit of reading on this specific issue. I think the great weakness for the Europeans is the agro commodities. Not just wheat and barley, but also the fertilizers. I think that is where they can really squeeze the Europeans so hard, squeeze them until they scream, quite frankly. I think that's where the Russians, if they really want to hurt the Europeans, that's how they'll do it. And because between Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, it's essentially, just to round it off, it's basically 25% of their agro of Europe. You can't survive if you lose roughly a third of your needs for food in terms of the actual food itself, and much more importantly, fertilizer. Because if you don't have the fertilizer that you need, especially in these developed plots of land where soil has long ago been exhausted, and you need artificial fertilizers to be able to grow crops, the essential crops for your people. If you don't have that, it's lights out. It's over. I mean, you're going to have people going hungry because there will not be enough money, and the poorer people, and especially the working poor, the lower middle classes, those are the ones who are going to suffer catastrophically, because of course they pay a larger share of their into food. And so the era of cheap food is over. The era of being able to buy 2,000 calories for €5, that is gone if the really want to hurt the Europeans. And I don't think that the Europeans have thought enough at this time.
No, they haven't thought it through. I completely agree. I absolutely agree about agriculture. Now, again, this same person that I was talking about, this person who works with who works within the GOP and is a congressional person, he's been making this point about fertilizer and all these problems about food since November. He's hanging away at this particular drum, and again, he says it's extremely frustrating because you're listening to me. You know, he talks to Congress people. You're not listening to me. You're not listening to the experts, and that's in the United States. And by the way, the US is a huge agricultural producer. You thought people there would listen and would understand about things. And I suspect there are some who do. In Europe, who don't. That's the problem. I mean, in Europe, the political class in Europe, very little understanding of industry and technology. I mean, that isn't really where they come from. I mean, basically, they come from the media. If you look at their ultimate, I mean, they're journalists. Of course, to the extent that they have any knowledge of industry and finance, which is limited, they have no knowledge at all of agriculture. It's not something that attracts them. It's not, you know, sexy and attractive. And besides, you know, if you're a left of centre politician in Europe, you don't like farmers very much because they tend to vote right. You get all that kind of thing, and you know they tend to be conservatives as well. You know, they tiddly squat about all of this, and they are desperately, disastrously out of their depth, and always assume, you know, Gonzalo, you said it so well earlier in the program, that all these structures that seem so solid and which have existed so long will still continue to be solid and will continue to exist. They can do whatever they hold their team, make weird decisions, and somehow ultimately it will stay stable because it's the stability they've always known throughout their lives.
Yeah, and I'm dumbfounded again at the foolishness of these decision makers, and yeah, Alex, bail me out because I'm just dumbfounded at the stupidity of these people.
We've got a lot of questions. You guys want to get to some questions?
Let's get on to the questions. Yeah, let's do questions.
Let's run through these questions quickly. Good questions and comments in general. So let me pull them up here because I'm also dumbfounded. I'm stunned at this. I mean, I'm living in Europe, so I'm not happy about everything that's going to be coming our way. But what can we do? It would be interesting to see how Europe reacts to all of this, how the Europeans react to all of the things that could be our way. A lot of chaos is about to hit. V-Plan says, thank you so much for your objective analysis. Russia historically had a lot of corruption in the army. There are rumors about poorly maintained equipment left behind, tires collapsed, etc. How do you perceive the improvements in the military equipment? You have those rumors that equipment is falling apart in this conflict, and you know the supply lines are all messed up. And
I think that's just picking up on some random bits of information that don't necessarily translate to the entirety of the Russian armed forces. And also, there was a minister of defense before Shoigu, an individual, his name I forget, but he was
Serdyukov.
He was the man who I believe reformed and revamped the Russian military, and really went to town insofar as cleaning up the corruption of the Russian armed forces. And this was way back in the early 2000s, in the mid 2000s, and that since then they've had a emphasis on meritocracy, of having the best men and the best equipment succeed. So I don't think that that's an issue. And as far as maintenance issues, yes, I've seen some people say, oh, look at this tire of this truck. This must be indicative of the entire Russian armed forces. And that just seems a little bit stretching it, to tell you the truth.
I entirely agree. I've been hearing these stories about the Russian forces since, well, way back in the Cold War. It's just a trope. And I mean, there may be times when it was true, or at least close to being true, but the fact is they always seem to get there in the end, and
Well,
that's ultimately all that matters. I mean,
yeah, lousy tires and lousy maintenance, yet they're still winning. So how does that exactly work?
Yeah.
Does that mean that maybe that we should not worry about having clean maintenance, and that way we'll win a war?
Yeah.
I mean,
I mean, I'm not, as I say, a military person, but I have read World War II history, and I remember the shooting back that far. You find all kinds of German commentators at that period, German writers at that time, soldiers, military people, the Russians, they might have been brave fighters, no technical skills and things behind them. Their T-34s, their tracks fell off and their guns fell off and the shells bounced around and getting to Berlin. But I mean, seriously, you can read it there. I mean, I think it's just, frankly, I don't place any. I wouldn't place any reliance on it.
it's cope. It's cope.
Yeah.
You want to hang your hat and say, "Oh no, they're not that good." And see, here's some random picture of some truck stuck in the mud. Proves that they are not really good. That's the way to cope. Yeah, that's right.
I agree with you. Yeah, I agree with you.
Rich says that Russia has a very advanced industrial base. What the West also ignores is that the materials like titanium, palladium, etc. Russia supplies of the highest grade because we developed the advanced equipment processes to refine them.
This is Russia's great weakness, and I know this economy quite well, by the way. I mean, I'm not talking about things I don't. Russia's very, very good at the very advanced technology stuff. They're very good at agriculture. They've now got a pretty well organized service industry. Where they are much more income dependent is in some sectors of the consumer goods production. And obviously they import a lot of consumer goods, but Lada cars uses things, spares that provided by Peugeot, for example, textile brands, they import cotton. But, and something which I have experience of, I should say once upon a time, this is a long time ago, I worked in insolvency. I worked very heavily in insolvency working for us. One of the things that very, very strongly struck me at the time, because doing insolvency work a lot with textile, consumer goods manufacturers, light industry, because they're the people who are most vulnerable. What always amazed me was the incredible flexibility of that part of the economy. Really high technology, big industry, takes a long time to turn around. But at that kind of end, you can adapt and find new supplies and come up with new ideas, and organise restructurings, and do all sorts of things within an incredibly short time. And businesses which looked like they were about to fold turn around within about 2 weeks, and and that is not an exaggeration.
Yura Gabor says Hungary is refusing to give any kind of military support for Ukraine and won't let it enter any weapon transport via Hungarian territory to Ukraine. Orban will sing a different tune a month from now.
Actually, can I add to that is that Poland has just announced that they will not host any kind of European aircraft going to fight in Ukraine. I mean, they've been adamant about it. And there was some news organization that was saying that Poland was fine with this. And the Polish Ministry of the Exterior, I believe, I could be wrong, but they made a statement and went all over the social media to say, no European planes based out of Poland. We are not getting involved in this. We'll help along, but no planes.
I know that story very well because the news organisation that was promoting this story over the weekend relentlessly was the Financial Times.
Really?
I'm absolutely furious about that because I again remember when the Financial Times used to be a serious newspaper, and it was obvious to me when I read it that it was fake news, and it was in fact the chancellery of the Polish Prime Minister who actually came out on Twitter and said, this is fake news. I'm
Mm.
absolutely never going to do anything like this. Now, I think that if Orban is re-elected, I think on the contrary, he will stick to his line. And
Yeah,
I will say this
agree.
again. I was talking to somebody from Hungary on Saturday. Alex knows whom I'm referring to, and I also have other contacts in Hungary. My personal trainer, for what it's worth, is Hungarian, and they all tell me exactly the same thing. They all tell me that the Hungarians are absolutely determined to stay out of it. And this isn't just people who are Orban, it's many of the people who support the opposition as well. They're close to this affair. They know far too well to get dragged into this particular.
Very good. John McGuire says, what is your opinion on the almost complete lack of reference to hybrid warfare by the experts? And as the days pass, obvious this is a game. The first Russo-Ukrainian conflict had 14,000 casualties in reference to the Donbass, I believe.
I've never taken this whole warfare thing at all seriously. At least not so far as I'm concerned. Yeah, I mean, look, good at deception operations. They are very good at warfare. They do all that sort of thing. But the point about hybrid warfare is that it all originates from a misrepresentation of something the chief of the Russian General Staff, a man called Gerasimov, said some years ago. He talked about the need to counteract Western hybrid warfare. And a British commentator, briefly, Mark Galeotti, took all that up and talked about how Gerasimov had written a piece about hybrid warfare. And people took Galeotti's piece and said that the Russians had this concept of hybrid warfare. It was stage by stage by stage by stage. The words, first Gerasimov's article, comments were distorted, then Galeotti's article about Gerasimov's comments was distorted as well, and we ended up with this concept of hybrid warfare. How can the Russians conduct hybrid warfare? What does hybrid warfare even mean precisely if we are talking about information warfare? Well, as we're seeing over the last 10 days, when it comes to information warfare, the Russians aren't even on the starting blocks. All the advantages, at least in the Western world, are held by the United States and its friends.
I completely agree that I think that this whole notion of a hybrid warfare is just like a cool meme, that you throw around in some think tank or in some policy like that. As a practical matter, it seems very clear that the Russians are just conducting a good old-fashioned 19th century war, to tell you the truth. I think also what they've been very smart about is they've made sure that their ministries of defense and foreign relations, whenever they make a statement, it's true, or it turns out to be absolutely true. They never try to, put out to stick to what's actually true and not propagandize. And I think that perhaps they're saving the big lie for later on. But so far, this has proven to be very useful because you can more or less trust what the Ministry of Defense of the Russians is saying, but you cannot trust what the Ukrainian Zelensky regime is saying because they lie just about every breath that they take. It's constant propaganda, constant morale boosted with lies and fairy tales, whereas the Russians are very like, this happened, this happened, this happened, and on the one hand, the Zelensky regime is absolutely winning the Twitter war, but the Russians are coming out ahead in terms of credibility, and so I think that's more important in the long run, especially as this thing is playing out.
I agree with that. Can I just go back to my family from Germany? And as I said how incredibly effective the German information machine during the war was, if you lived in Germany, and how widely it was believed. And I mean, apparently, would hear Western and Soviet broadcasts, the Germans won every time on that. I mean, this is something I had not appreciated. Within Germany, people believed it completely, but it didn't stop the Russians getting to Berlin. And that's always the thing people have got to remember. You can win information war, but at the end of the day, it's the kinetic war. What happens on the ground that ultimately makes the difference.
Gonzalo, I want to ask you a real quick question. I know that you've been involved in the entertainment world, so you understand this world fairly well. Can you give us some insight as to how the regime has acted or is acting, given the fact that you are dealing with Zelensky himself being an entertainer? Much of his cabinet comes from that world. I mean, I've seen screenwriters, TV producers. I mean, do you have any insight as to how these are thinking, maybe before and during this war?
Well, yes, of course, it's very easy. They have a fantasy they believe that they can do. And the entertainment business, in order to succeed, in order to produce a movie, for those listening, I started out as a writer. I got my degree. I went to Hollywood to work as a screenwriter, and I was lucky enough to be a bit successful. And then I pivoted into writing novels, and I was successful at that. And so I know and I would later produce and in fact in South America and Chile. And I can tell you that a lot of times what you do is that you pretend that you have a project that will work out, and a lot of times you fake it until you make it in the entertainment business. And because it depends on force of personality and business. For instance, I am a producer. A script and a series of actors who have committed to that script. Actor perhaps who is committed to that script, gentlemen, are financiers. And I go to you, I start to pitch you the movie, and I tell you how wonderful it's going to be. And by force of my personality and my persuasiveness, I try to convince you of the reality of this project. And many times that force of personality, that ability to convince people, that makes them sign the checks to make it happen. And so you get used to this notion that I just have to control that this is happening for it to happen. And I do believe Zelensky, and certainly his puppet master, which is Kolomoisky, Igor Kolomoisky, a Ukrainian, Israeli, Cypriot businessman. He lives in Switzerland. Is the power of Zelensky. He controls him. Zelensky has no political experience before because he was just a movie in Ukraine, a local movie star, very successful at it, but again, just not a politician. Well, it was Kolomoisky who sort of like put him into this position and then surrounded him with a retinue of hand-picked advisors and cabinet and whatnot. And of course, the key issue is these bullies, these thugs, these hired muscle that were part of the Azov battalion, because Kolomoisky is the man who the Azov battalion and financed a lot of these very neo-Nazi organizations. And parenthetically, it's very odd that a Jewish financier would be the one to finance a neo-Nazi group in Ukraine. Well, these people believe that if you convince others of reality, then the reality comes into being. And so I believe that is what's happening. They have this mental model. This is how reality is. You convince people, and it becomes a reality. And the Russians are simply saying, well, it doesn't matter what you say. What matters is how many troops are around and how you flank your city and surround it and take it over. That is what matters. And so you see the difference between a social media war and an actual war. Yeah. And only one of them matters in the end.
Yeah, I agree with that completely.
All right. Rob says, this is a good question. What's stopping Biden from restarting, and why the shale industry, public companies, are so afraid of investing in capex again? Do you think oil rise is a short-term phenomenon? If so, for how many years?
I don't think that it's a short-term phenomenon. I think, on the contrary, it's one that's going to be long-standing. Now, can I just say, I mean, I am not, again, I'm not an oil engineer, I'm not a geologist, I'm not any of those things. I think about Keystone, all those things, it's because ideology and the agreements that this administration have made make it extremely difficult for change policy. I mean, it's one thing probably to talk to Maduro, and it's one thing perhaps to talk to Khamenei. The progressive wing of the party might wear that. I think it would be much more difficult to get them to accept a total switch on their beloved ecological, to put it. But even if that passes, even if you start going down the shale path and doing things and reopening Keystone pipelines, it's not going to be anywhere near enough to sort out the oil and gas issues, because shale has anyway only a limited life, and secondly, there just isn't enough of it. How you can come up with any kind of dodge. You cannot replace the world's second, or is it third, one of the world's big three oil producers. It can't be done.
Yeah.
Very good. GEC says Russia has the new PD-30 engine. Boeing's decision to sanction Russia may increase Russia's production to above 100 airplanes a year within 5 years.
Well, that's possible. Now, to make a point, they do not yet have the PD-35. They have the PD-14, which is a much smaller aircraft engine, but a very advanced one. And that's already now rolling out in production. And you have the MS-21, which is, the jet, which is coming out, which is a narrow body, but designed for internal airline traffic. The MS-21 is about to enter production. For internal traffic, that's mostly what you need. The big ones are more necessary for international flights. The P5, which is comparable to the big General Electric engines, that will probably appear in the late 2020s, when the big start to appear. The big, if you're going to go, you can use 14s, adapted Ilyushin 9. So you could have a wide body, additional, range with 4 jets, but that's becoming economically unattractive. What you want is jets on your, and that will start to appear in the late 70s. But it's not. The point I'm trying to make is it's not quite soon as you say, but ultimately the Russians wanted to rebuild their aircraft, which after the Union collapsed, essentially imploded, and for very good reasons, because not all were very likable, and that's being generous. But they to build jets domestic themselves, because it was always commercially possible to import them from Europe and the United States. So even a company like Aeroflot had to have its arm twisted to invest in buying Russian jets, because of course production of Russian jets was still at such a small level. Of course, that they have no option but to buy Russian jets. You will start to see them coming in much greater quantities in a few years.
All right. Eurogabor said, I meant that Orban will start to punch above once again in Brussels once he backs the election.
Okay, I misunderstood you.
So he has to walk.
I agree.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I absolutely do agree, actually.
Thank you for clearing that up.
Yeah, I think that Orban is the only other heavyweight politician that we currently have in Europe.
Yeah.
I can't think of another.
I can't think of another.
Putin and Orban as the heavyweights. I mean, irrespective of nations and the countries that they lead, but capable leaders is my point. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, you can make an argument for Erdogan to a certain extent, even though he's erratic and he makes many bad decisions, but he does understand how to play the game.
Yes,
But
exactly.
it's that very erraticness that's
Yeah, he's a player. He's at the table, but you just
But he makes a lot of bad bets.
but he makes exactly. So
And I think the Russians are waiting for the opportunity to punish for the Kazakhstan intervention. I think that really must have just really bothered the Russians. That he seems to have in that business. So we'll see.
Yeah.
The
Chinese
Chinese think so as well. The Chinese are feeling him actually. Yeah.
Yes.
Shane says the Financial Advisory Journal said the risk of nuclear war is now 10% in 12 months. How real is this threat?
Can I point something out to that?
Yeah.
This idiotic notion of X number of percentage points. Compared to what? I've always found that absurd, kind of, But anyway, Alexander, you were going to say?
You took the very words out of my mouth. Well, not quite the words. I mean, I just don't take that. I just don't buy that. Why would the Russians use nuclear weapons? They're winning the war in Ukraine. So what's the point of that? The pen isn't going to be Ukraine. They made that absolutely clear. They've set up a deconfliction hotline with the Russians. There's going to be attempts to get insurgency going in Ukraine. I think that's incredibly bad for multiple reasons. But I don't think that's really realistically going to start nuclear war. I think, and I don't think that anything that Putin said has in any way threatened war. I mean, again, I think we must be extremely careful about not falling into the trap of accepting that what other people say Putin said is what the man actually did say. So I don't think this is a real danger at all, actually. And I think it doesn't help to talk about this. It distracts from the real problem, which are the ones that we've been talking about in this program and which Gonzalo talked about in his Telegram channel, which is the problem of the economy, where we have just exploded the economic equivalent of a nuclear bomb under ourselves.
Yep. For everybody, I have Gonzalo's link to his YouTube channel in the description box down below. His new YouTube channel, which is doing really, really well. And there is that link down below. Please, everybody, subscribe to his channel. And let's see. RDDR says anti-war left splitting over Ukraine. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's
Are they splitting?
I think they are actually. I mean, bear in mind that
Is there anti-war left?
But I was going to that's absolutely right. To the extent that it exists, and it's microscopic. I mean, the force that brought out 1 million people onto the streets of London in 2002 to protest the Iraq War. I mean, it's just vanished. It's just disappeared. It's been, and to the extent that it exists, it has indeed split. I think one of the things we have to acknowledge is that the anti-war left in Europe, which used to be a very powerful force, is something that doesn't exist anymore. How it came about that it collapsed so completely is a very interesting question. One with many answers, but I'm afraid that would take a whole further program to look into, to discuss it properly. But the left is gone.
Yeah. Say two words to explain why the left turned neocon. One word is Clinton, and the other is Blair. I think that those two politicians sort of like swerved the left in a direction that has caused so much damage. But I agree. It's a conversation.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
David, thank you. Max, Gonzalo, what are the chances of the West backtracking on Russian sanctions?
None.
Yeah.
Because these people don't have the humility to recognize that they made a mistake, to walk back the mistake. You see, you gentlemen, I think that we're all grown up enough is that when we say something that's wrong or do something that was incorrect, we have the assurance and self-confidence to I did something foolish. I'm sorry. I'm just going to have to backtrack or change my opinion or change my mind or just, face up to our mistakes. But the people who are leading us, you have to understand that the reason that they are in positions of leadership is that they have spotless records. They are people who graduated from the right universities and did all the right internships, and they never made a mistake. They never had any substantial failure. And so because of this, they grew up spotlessly. And now that they have actual power and they are running things, they have no experience with failure. They have no experience of how to deal with a mistaken judgment and walk it back, turn it around, and say, no, this was a mistake and we shouldn't have done this. Instead of why we should have done X. They don't have experience, and so in this case, I do not see them back the sanctions. I think that their pride and hubris will prevent them from doing such things. The very fact that they're reaching out to people like the Iranians and the Nicaraguans to figure out a way to plug up this hole in the oil production proves the fact that these fools cannot admit to a mistake, walk it back, and just move on. They can't. They are constitutionally unable to do so. Alexander, would you agree with that assessment?
I completely agree with you. One would love to see a situation where somebody like, say, Jerome Powell comes along, rocks up to the White House, says to Joe, "Dear Joe, what have you? This is absolutely insane what you've done. Let's try and find a way around. We're going, everything is going to pieces." Or Lagarde or some telephone Charles or Ursula von der Leyen or Beck and but it's not going to happen. That's even if we get a 50% collapse and 70% unemployment, they wouldn't do it. These people have no. I think it's an important thing to understand. These sanctions that they've are not going to be reversed. I don't have any doubt about that, nor should.
Yeah.
High IQ for Western leaders is too much credit. Thank you, Sparky.
I beg to differ. We can mock them, but the thing is, they truly are intelligent and they lack judgment, and this is the great, and this is something that I started noticing without being able to articulate the way I am now, of course, but I started seeing the piece of this in the early 90s when I was in university in the United States, that extremely intelligent people who are exceptionally compliant, exceptionally willing to just go along, and they never stick out, and that's how they they go along with groupthink, no matter how absurd, and so they never learn to make their own judgments and stand up for themselves out. And so, because it takes a great deal of experience in sticking out to be able to do so at such critical moments and critical junctures as we are experiencing today. You see, you have to train yourself to stick out and stick up for a judgment to be very contrary to acceptable wisdom, the accepted wisdom, conventional wisdom. But the people who are in charge have never had to do that because they advanced by keeping down, by doing what everybody did, by not sticking, and that's they're in the situation. But they're not stupid. That's the great mistake. Is that they're stupid. They're not. They just lack moral courage. I would put it in those terms. I don't know if you gentlemen would agree with that.
I agree. My wife is an academic, and I've seen how. And by the way, an academic at a very good university, one which has made a real policy of trying to keep debate open where people are allowed to say. But I've seen, as a result, through my wife, what has been going on in the academic and intellectual worlds in Britain, and by the way, also in the United States and Europe. And one of the things that's happened, and it's been extraordinary, is how academic education has changed in the last 40-50 years, and where it actually sought to be challenging and rewarded people who went out of their way to think differently. Now, the way to accept and the particular skill set you need to excel in an academic environment is to be as conformist as possible, and to be conformist in the right way.
Mm.
And that does require, unquestionably, a certain intelligence. I mean, it certainly does. What it doesn't require is an inquiring intelligence. And given the route of political leadership, you go straight out of university, you go into internships, journalism, or some light forms of law, or more often now increasingly into political parties and political activism. You don't have that sort of bottom of political leaders in the West who'd worked their way, they'd built up their businesses, they'd worked in really heavy finance law or criminal law, or if you were on the left, they'd worked up their way through trade unions, accepted setbacks, learned from their mistakes, gradually acquired a level of experience. You don't have that any longer. And that's why so many of them, by the way, are so young as well. I mean, once upon a time, politicians in Europe, in the United States, the average age, at least in Europe, would be people in their 60s. Now, if you're over 40, I mean, you're already seen as somebody who's, frankly, older than. I mean, it's just extraordinary to see how it's. So these are completely the wrong sort of people to be running a country.
Guy says that CRP is perfectly describing the mid-wit. Thank you for that. Let's see, Red Line says, in an era of lies, truth is a weapon.
Sure enough.
Yes.
That's getting out there. A lot of people.
It is indeed. It's picking up. It's picking up.
Picking up.
Good is good. Yeah, it's picking up. It comes from Solzhenitsyn, I believe.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I believe so.
Interesting. I'm a big fan of.
There you go.
Teo, thank you for that super sticker. And I says, if Poland intervenes in the war, I think NATO will follow.
No, they won't interfere.
Exactly. I already ruled this out. I don't think they. I have contacts in. People are very worked up there. There's no support for Polish people going out and fighting in Ukraine. That's not.
Yeah, because the Poles have actually been invaded by the Russians. They know not to mess with them. And on the other hand, I again, speculative on my part, and you guys know I love to go out on the weakest branch. But I suspect that some people in Poland are thinking, Lviv might be there for the taking. I mean, it's perhaps they're not saying it in those words, but they're definitely thinking about it, because Lviv is an ancient, and they want it back. So we'll see how that goes.
Yes.
I think with the right diplomacy, if things go the way we're seeing them go, the right diplomacy just might get it.
Yeah.
I think, by the way, that Putin talking about Ukraine continues in this path, that its existence will be called into question.
Exactly.
I think he's already made up his mind. I think that this is just laying the groundwork for a partitioning of Ukraine. This is in. I think that the Lugansk and Donetsk might break off, but the whole Novorossiya, that is this long tongue of land from the Kharkov region, perhaps Poltava, stretching all the way to Odessa, and certainly all of the coast of the Black Sea. I think that all of that, they are eyeing it as a separate republic, and I don't think that they are thinking to themselves that they want to integrate it into Russia. Crimea will go back formally into, well, it already is, I think, formally in Russia, but this Novorossiya will be a satellite state, a puppet state of some sort, and Ukraine will be reduced to maybe a third of its size, around Kiev, and it seems clear that I mean, when Putin made that statement, basically a veiled threat that if you keep annoying me, I'll just start breaking you up. I think he's already made up his mind in that direction.
I agree.
Yeah.
I would also make Alexander?
No, I agree. I just want to say,
I would also make the point that if somehow Poland, Hungary, and Romania were able to break away from the European Union from a negotiation diplomacy standpoint, I bet you that Russia would definitely sit down with him and find a way to stabilize the West. Even all three of those countries have claims to areas there.
I think there isn't going to be Poland and Hungary breaking away from the European Union. I think that
for diplomacy's sake, I mean, like van der Leyen, just leave us alone. We need to talk to these guys.
Perhaps, but I think that what might happen is that as the economic situation in Europe begins to deteriorate, and as the incredible stresses between the French economy and the German economy start to rise due to the Germans' unwillingness to have a weak euro, I think that disintegration of the eurozone will allow the other peripheral nations of Europe to sort of like sleep away. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I don't know if that might wind up being what happens. The whole European project sort of like disintegrates, because at the end of the day, the whole European project was the notion of tying up France and Germany so tightly together that they would never go to war again. And it might be that central relationship that gets so fractured over a inflationary depression in Europe that leads to the whole European artifact disintegrating like a sandcastle, and these smaller countries sort of like drifting off, if you will. Does that make any sense to you?
No, it makes a lot of sense. Absolutely. Commando Crossfire says, "Repeat lie often enough, and it becomes the truth." Well said. And GC says, "Good cop, bad cop being played by Russia and Chechnya?" A lot of people are talking about Chechnya. I think they're giving too much.
I think they are, quite honest. I think it's also wanting to reassure Moscow, the Kremlin, that the Chechnya is totally loyal and can be relied upon. So I don't place a huge amount of credence on this. They're fearsome, very tough fighters, but in a war like this, I think that they're not the tremendous force that people think they are. I don't think you can overstate their role.
Rascal says, "Watch Roses Have Thorns, Part 6 of this massacre on YouTube. First-hand up close, uncensored footage. Watch police standing by to watch people butchered by the NZs. Gonzalo is right about civilians."
About what I don't quite understand what was said there.
You're right about the civilians. Your hunch about what's going on the ground with civilians, human shields, all of these things being implemented.
In Mariupol, the civilians are not being allowed to leave the city through humanitarian corridors at the instigation of the Zelensky regime. And so that gives you a clue. They want to use the civilians as human shields, the cowards. I mean, that's all that they are. There I have, there is a concentration of these Azov battalion thugs, whom I consider just criminals, just treated as criminals. And the military justice in dealing with criminals is very clear. And I completely support that, because they are not an army. They are thugs, criminals, allied to a government that was bought and paid for by an absent oligarch who thought that he could get his way and rape Ukraine and destroy the Ukrainian people. I get very emotional about this particular issue.
It says it took 35 days for Germany to conquer Poland at the beginning of World War I. Germany lost 59,000 troops.
Yeah, and there's also half the country, because remember the Soviet Union, the other half of it.
Yeah.
Good point. Yeah, that's true. Khalil says, once Putin succeeds in Odessa, would they go as far as Transnistria, Moldova proper, to secure Bessarabian Gap, which can also include parts of? Good question.
Well, to make again, I don't grasp of the geography or of the strategy to understand this, but if Odessa were to fall under Russian control, then it would be in effect, it seems to me, a land bridge all the way to Transnistria. And I presume this is what's about here. I can't say more.
Yeah,
I just don't really know.
Does that? No, I think that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
You're fine. You create that land bridge, but question takes it one step further.
As
Alexander,
well.
do you then
Moldova as
turn
well.
your attention to Moldova, and then
I
and then
think
actually Moldova, you look at Romania?
I
Very
think
unlikely.
at the moment, very unlikely. Which I mean, let's not get ahead of ourselves. I mean, Putin and the Russians have their hands full with Ukraine at the moment. I don't think they're very interested in Moldova at this time.
No, they're
Right.
not interested in causing problems for themselves.
No.
That's the bottom line. Why would you go and problems for yourself rather by threatening Moldova or Romania in
Yeah.
any sense? I'm sure what will happen is that as the Russian army comes close to that border, they will communicate with one another, the two armies, the army of the Russians and the Romanians, and come to a quick and very civil kind of arrangement so that there's no mistakes, no actual incident, because there's no upside for the Russians, and the Russians are not time. I mean, they don't have any interest in those countries, so why would they bother? Quite frankly,
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with that.
Tim says, as who's 63 says, can we call the cities by Russian names?
Gonzalo, I am going to be completely on this. I mean, I think we should call cities by the names that the people who live there.
I agree completely.
Correct. Says, why does Russia require payment in gold and or silver to make heads explode? No?
I don't think there's enough gold.
A lot of people talk about this.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, you hear this a lot, yeah.
I
Well,
don't think
people
there's
always
enough
talk about gold. But Alexander, you're completely correct. The amount of gold in the world is dwarfed by the amount of fiat currency. So as a practical matter, you could never have a currency backed by gold at this time.
No.
The global economy is simply too complex and too big.
Yeah.
So yeah. And also, if you trade in gold, the hassle of moving physical, it's a nightmare. Okay. And so yeah. Oops, you winked out. Are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still there. Am I still there?
Yeah, all good. Everyone's good. Everyone's
Okay,
good. Yeah.
Good.
No, the point is that with physical gold is a hassle, and of course, if you're dealing with any gold broker, your gold certificate is as solid as the broker, and so it's a hassle. It's currency, and the Russians, of course, are going to be thinking to themselves, well, we want to be dealing in rubles, so that foreign customers are forced to essentially up our own currency, which is what the United States has been doing for close to 80 years. So yeah, I don't see anybody seriously doing anything with gold. I think that the Russians removing the VAT tax of 20%, the value-added tax of 20% that they slapped on gold purchases, I think that was more a PR move than a real. It's not going to change anything in a real sense in the economy of the global or the local economy.
Yes. Yeah. If you link the value of your currency to an important tradable asset like oil, for example, I think that's much more. Now you're talking exactly. I think everybody gets very worked up about gold, and it has its uses. But I think people need to also understand its limits. And I think I agree with all the points Gonzalo was making.
Yeah, Sparky says the petro ruble.
The petro ruble,
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
And the agro ruble as well.
And the agro ruble as
well.
Yeah. Exactly. IC Sarek says Israel is the only smart nation not to sanction Russia. They agree to bar oligarchs, but they cannot survive with Russian commodities.
Absolutely. And of course, Bennett, who's the Israeli prime minister, has been to Moscow, has met Putin. So,
yeah,
and
he basically flew out to Moscow and Putin said to his face, "Butt out," basically. That must be kind of humiliating, actually.
I know.
I bet you wanted to talk about the JCPOA.
Yeah, I'm sure he did.
Good point. I thought of that.
Yeah. GA, thank you for that super chat. Commando Crossfire. Russian military defense. Ukrainian refugees accuse Ukrainian nationalists of shooting civilians, trying or accused of collaborating with Russia.
Yeah.
Flying Boar asks, what's the update on African and Indian students stuck and held hostage in Ukraine? Good question.
huge row about Indian students. Modi telephoned Putin, Putin telephoned Macron. They had a furious row which lasted for 90 minutes, and it was basically about the Indian students, as I've subsequently learned. Absolutely. And it was Indian students in Kharkiv, apparently, who weren't able to get out, and the Kremlin out, which I haven't read, by the way, on the website because it's unobtainable. The Interfax news agency provided a copy of it. Macron said that he talked to the Kiev in the government there, and other that the Indian students in Kharkiv have finally been able to leave. All I will say about this is that this is the one story that is difficult for the Ukrainian government, which has managed to break through to some extent in my neighborhood. We have a neighborhood net. We have we sort of chats and WhatsApp groups and things of that kind. But people have been talking about that particular incident, about African and Indian students having problems in Europe. So it's the only thing I've seen of an anti or Ukrainian nature, which has actually broken through. Where we are with this, I simply don't know. Whether this problem continues or it's been solved, I really don't know.
That's very interesting because, as you gentlemen know, I'm a Chilean citizen, and Chile has no diplomatic mission to Ukraine, and Ukraine does not have a diplomatic mission to Chile because trade is insignificant between the two nations, and so the Chilean embassy in Warsaw handles all Ukraine affairs. And so when this crisis occurred, there are less than a dozen Chilean citizens in Kharkov, in the Kharkov area, and that my own two children who were born in Chile. And so the Chilean embassy in Warsaw was trying to organize and evacuate all Chileans from Kharkov. They had latched on to the Indian delegation, which was organizing this convoy, I suppose, of students, because apparently there are a lot of students at the Kharkov universities here, because Kharkov has several universities, several very good universities. And so because of this, I was advised by the Chilean embassy that if I wanted to join these Indian students, for various reasons, I declined the offer, but I was aware of this, and I thought that Indians had a clear path out of the country. And so I'm very surprised at this news. And it's very interesting that the would not have treated the Indians well or realized that other nations had, for lack of a better word, glommed on to the Ukrainian exodus. And so this is very interesting.
This is just what international reports have said. But as I said, you've talked about here in Britain. Now, again, I mean, I don't have direct access to this, but I mean, I don't know what's going on the group, but it has certainly been talked about in Britain as well, which makes me think it must be true.
Sparky says many U.S. decision makers are people who think food begins in the back grocery store. Those who don't never give a thought in the. Yes. Well said. Well said, Sparky. Herding Cat says just watch part of the Yuval Harari interview in Ukraine. Oh my God, the gross hypocrisy. Will this help the World Economic Forum somehow?
I'm afraid I don't know who this person is. The more I think about it, the more I'm convinced this is not going to the World Economic Forum. I think crashing the world economy in this particular way, I don't think that was the plan. I think the plan was to crash Russia, not the world economy. Yeah. And I think that there are signs of panic now in Europe over this.
Yeah, Yuval Harari. Yuval Harari is the author of *Sapiens*, which was a big bestseller about the evolution of human beings, Homo sapiens. And also there was a sequel book. It was a big bestseller, and he is also an advisor to Schwab at the World Economic Forum. Is an American, the intellectual, academic, one of these people who's sort of like in the NGO, academia, World Economic Forum blog. And he's who's been pushing for the Great Reset and the New World Order and all this nonsense. And I would agree with you. I think that the idea that I think their goal was basically to break up Russia. They had been talking about breaking up Russia into smaller, bite-sized pieces that they could exploit to their heart's content.
Yeah.
And Vladimir Putin and the current Kremlin regime clearly had other thoughts in mind. And so here we are. And as I said in my live stream yesterday, I think in the end, this whole situation economically benefited Russia in terms of actual income, and also it will benefit it in terms of shoving it into being completely independent, and it will hurt the European and American economies, especially because they are so fragile at this time compared to the Russian economy is hardened because of the foolish sanctions over the last 8 years.
I agree with that. I agree with everything of that.
Yeah. For your super sticker, appreciate it. As the military-industrial complex will be the death of us all, ain't a class war.
Well,
ain't no war. Especially today, it is a class war. Everywhere you're it is a class war. Kafar says Ukraine forces are planning to build a nuclear reactor at the institute in Kharkov. Foreign journalists arrived. Foreign journalists arrived to film and prep for accusation against Russia. Russia says Kiev scrub USA labs.
Well, I heard all of these stories. This is the kind of thing, and what one has to take. I take with great care, because the Russians make allegations, the Iranians make allegations. We can't assume that any of this is true. So far, I story about the Ukrainian lab, and so far nothing like that seems. That's, I think, all I usefully say.
Yeah, the Russian Ministry of Defense came out and said that this was the plan, and they came out and said it first, and a few hours later, it started, coming out that the Zelensky regime was planning on doing this, of causing some sort of false flag event incident at the Kharkov nuclear facility. I wasn't even aware that there was a nuclear facility in Kharkov until I lived here, and that was a little bit scary. Again, the Russians have no interest or motivation to cause a kind of nuclear accident, whereas the Zelensky has all the incentive in the world to have a nuclear incident happen and then blame it on the Russians. So I tend to believe the Russian Ministry of Defense. This incident that seems to have become a non-event insofar as the Kharkov nuclear facility. Now, insofar as the Russians finding, I think that this is a real story, by the way. The Russians finding biological warfare sites in the areas that they captured. This seems true. They have been releasing documents about this, and I've been following this. And it seems to be accurate that the Americans apparently had been funding work on anthrax and plague in different locations in Ukraine. And the Russians have produced documents that seem to show, documents and other evidence seems to show that this is true, including documents from the United States telling the operators of these facilities in Ukraine to destroy all of the material that they had been working on, and how to go about destroying it in a way that would not, implicate in Washington. Now, this is what the Russians are producing at this time. We'll have to see over time whether this is real. But at this time, enough evidence that hesitates to think that it's not true. Okay, right. But at the same time, it'll have to play out over time, and as to whether it will become something that a lot of people are actually upset about, would have any kind of political significance. But at this time, it seems it might be true, even though it would seem like a wild and insane kind of conspiracy theory. But stranger things in this war have happened, so we'll have to wait and see.
AD says the intentional direct close combat with Ukrainian Azov battalions, the best trained guys, almost from the Russian side without close air support, which they used in Syria. It is a message to NATO for the future. Interesting comment.
No opinion on that.
No opinion.
No.
Guy, thank you for your super sticker as well. And AD, consider an idea, of course, of Russian actions 2000s in Chechnya, Georgia, Syria, non-EU, non-NATO, then Ukraine, European, non-NATO, putting the West to the test. So the next step will be.
I don't think. I interpret every one of these moves that the Russians made as ultimately reactive. I don't see why they would want to go beyond this. I don't think they have any plan.
I think it stops at you. Yeah, FBI Glowboy says, I think the Biden administration is 50-50 between incompetence and malfeasance. Canceling Keystone Pipeline, stopping new oil drilling permits. U.S. can be energy independent, but elites want an interconnected global economy.
I agree, but I still think it's not 50-50 incompetence and whatever. I think it's about 80 incompetence. I really do.
Agree with Alexander.
All right, Margaret says the Brandon White House is sending the entire Western world off a cliff.
Yeah,
that is definitely there. Deborah, thank you for the super sticker. And Alsat says, should Venezuela recognize Kanye West as a legitimate president of the United States? Thank you for that. President Kanye, he did run for president of the United States. That is true. Ivana, thank you for your super chat. JT, thank you for super chat. Veteran Support says, I'm a U.S. veteran and I am no longer brainwashed. Thank you for telling the truth. Truth is lacking in my country. Thank you very much.
Unfortunately.
Thank you. Ralph says, in 94602, Tugland, California, RT.com has been accessible in various browsers on PC over the past week when so many claimed it's gone. It's gone until now.
Well, it has been
canceled now.
Okay. Yes, it is completely gone. It is completely gone in Britain as well. I mean, there is no place you can access it anymore.
Terrible. Sarah, thank you for that super chat. And Freedom Autopsy Report says Big Tech is the new great heathen army. The November elections shall be 1776.
Yes.
Knight says Peter Zerin said that Russia pushed to Romania. A lot of people are bringing up Romania on this stream, that Russia's going to push to. Is there Romania? Are you getting a lot of propaganda about that in the chat? A lot of people seem to be about that.
Yeah, I do not see that the Russians have any interest whatsoever in Romania or making trouble for themselves. Exactly. I'm not saying that the Russians are saints. I'm saying that they are practical people. And the Kremlin, whatsoever you may think of them, they are very rational. They are very clear as to their motivations. So I do not see them thinking to themselves, hey, this is a good idea to go and invade Romania or mess with Romania in any way. They don't have any beef with Romania. And so why would they bother?
The chat is saying Moldova. Yes, we get this in Romania. So maybe the spin is
I think it might be a local spin, a local thing.
Yeah, a local thing. Yeah. Hi, Alex. I am from Croatia. Some 200 Croatian mercenaries were sent to Ukraine, but by whom? Putin seems to be angry at Croatia. We should have stayed out of this. I am disappointed in my government.
I agree with that. I think we should have stayed out of it. The Ukrainian president, I think, wanted to. The Ukrainian government obviously didn't. But 200 men, well, more or less, is going to make a huge difference in this.
Yeah, and I've also heard that British mercenaries, or call them what you will, contractors, have gone to Ukraine. I saw a video of them, and they're the small clues, like for instance, the fruit drink that they were having. It was clear that they were in Ukraine. And, the Russians are clear that any foreign combatant is treated as a criminal and subject to martial law, and including on-the-spot execution. So if I were a foreign fighter, I would be very leery of getting involved in this situation. Because the rules of war, the Geneva Convention, the Russians have said outright, will not apply to combatants in Ukraine. So,
yeah. Ralph said, I said RT is not gone for me. Others are reporting the same. So RT is. It's interesting.
Okay.
Good. Let's see. Peter Lou says
RT is operating, but people are getting blocked. I think that's the issue.
Yeah, Peter. Correct. Peter Lou says, I disagree, Gonzalo. The U.S. has done the stupidest thing by cutting Russia from the dollar as world currency now has become untrustworthy. Many countries will seek alternatives. Same
Oh, yes.
stupid actions by MasterCard. I think you guys actually agree.
I was going to say, I'm not sure how you
Yeah.
disagree because I mean, unless I misunderstood.
Is that what you're saying? You're
Oh,
saying the same thing, right?
Well, exactly.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. I'm kind of like a little bit like just quizzical here. No, I think that this is a disaster for the dollar, and also we've already heard that Saudi Arabia, of all people, MBS is looking to diversify the Saudi portfolio out of the dollar. I mean, if I were the Treasury Department in the States right now, I'd be having a hissy fit over this.
Yeah.
You don't want Saudi Arabia, of all people, to start exiting the dollar.
Yeah.
And Khalil says the Romanian Moldova narratives are coming from U.S. think tank experts. It's interesting.
Those guys, man, they don't know what's best.
That's what they're paid. That's what they're paid to do, though. Yeah. So,
You're just
let's
annoying
see.
everybody.
Yeah.
Russell Hall says the left has no interest in free speech or freedom. They want to be viewed as benevolent champions for the people so they can rob their freedom.
Today's left, I think that's exactly right. I mean, it really is.
Yeah, Freedom Autopsy Report says Germans have been a recurring stomach ache for the world since Roman times.
Oh,
I don't
no,
know
we
if
mustn't say that. I mean,
don't know if
I
that's-
know
that's
German.
true.
And as I said, I mean,
I'm a big chunk of my ethnic heritage is German Danish. So yeah, come on, don't say such things.
Anyway, thank you for the super chat, Freedom Autopsy Report, and it's emotional times. Ellen says, "How are airlines faring? I know Finnair was taking a hit. How are the others managing?"
that's a very good question. How will they manage? I have no idea. How's Boeing getting
You
managed
gentlemen,
without-
the airline thing has given me this thought that I want to share with you both. Have you realized that in the past we would hop on a plane and travel to other continents, other countries without giving a second thought throughout the 90s, the 2000s, and the 2010s? But with this situation of COVID, and now this war, and now this enormous chasm that is opening up between Russia and the East, if you will, and the rest of Western Europe, and how we are entering into this inflationary depression, that kind of connectivity, that kind of casual globalism, it's gone forever. It's not returning. Even if combat were to end this exact second, the whole very careful structure, this very delicate architecture has collapsed, has been blown apart, and I do not see it ever recovering, to tell you the truth. And the old life that we enjoyed so thoughtlessly, we could say to ourselves, hey, we're in London today, let's go to the Maldives, for a week, and casually just jet off to the Maldives, paradise on earth, and then to our 100 miles in London. That's gone forever, and I think that we're not realizing it yet.
I'm afraid I agree with you completely. I mean, goodness knows, I know how it's been living in London to get to Greece. I mean, I'm trying to get to Greece. And, I mean, I agree. I think that also, my brother-in-law lives in Singapore, and I've never felt more remote from him than I have now.
Yeah, I think about my family in Chile. That it's another continent, and I frankly don't see myself going back there in many years. And to return to the issue of the airlines, I think very few will survive, and the only ones that survive are the ones that have enormous state support. I think that's the situation that we're going to be experiencing insofar as airlines are concerned.
I agree with you, I'm afraid.
Yeah. Makes the whole EU Schengen thing, in my opinion, completely useless.
Yeah.
Which was one of the big promises of the European Union. You can go anywhere and all of this stuff. I think that's completely useless now. It's also going to decimate a lot of countries, especially in Europe, that are dependent on Russian tourism. I mean, it's going to really hurt them a lot. All kinds of bad. Mohammed says, would the EU not gain much from the Belt and Initiative by the time it's fully online?
Would they gain from? Well, I think they would, and of course, Italy briefly was a part of it. But will it be implemented now? Will it be implemented? I can't help but think that a lot of what we're talking about, Belt and Road Initiative, that at least the way we understand things like this, belongs to a world which has just vanished. So I've always myself felt the Belt and Road Initiative had its roots and all the ones in Pakistan. Principally, it was about integrating the Russian economy with those enormous raw material resources and connecting it to China and creating, the greater Eurasia thing. I've always felt that was ultimately what it was all about. And I think that's going to become ultimately all that it's going to be about now. That's my own sense, at least.
Yes, that's like I said just now. That world is over, and it's a tragedy. My view is that the future is supposing that we come out of this war, that this whole incident, the Ukrainian incident, ends, but there is no wider war between the West and Russia, China. Well, it's going to be Russia, China, India, Iran, separate and their own universe. And they will be a completely separate thing from the West. And if that's the case, the West, well, Australia and Western Europe will be the appendages. And in the center will be frankly, and I hate to say this because it breaks my heart to say this, but at the center will be a broken America because the United States is so over-indebted, so overextended on so many fronts, the military front, its economy, everything, that I think that this is the thing that will break the camel's back, if you will. A hard spike in inflation in this over-indebted environment will just, it seems to me, will just kick out the legs of the whole American system. I mean, if I'm looking into the future clearly now, assuming that this war does not widen, it's China, Russia, India, Iran. That's the future. And the West, I think that this is the end. I mean, that's my thinking at this point. What do you gentlemen think of that?
Well, I certainly think it's the end of Europe. As I said, I expect in 10 years' time to be an economic backwater. And
I think sooner.
You
really think 10 years?
10 years, well, even 10 years. I'm being generous. But I think it's an economic backwater. It's going to become increasingly a cultural backwater as well. And I think that's the direction of travel, definitely.
Yeah. God, amazing.
It is amazing. I mean, that really does make you.
Yeah.
John McGuire says, I believe EU rules require a bit of overtime for this podcast. Kudos. Thank you, John, for that. Thank you very much. James says, will this be a new scramble for Africa, for North America and the Europeans, a new rush for African oil and a rush for an export market? How many people are talking about where Africa fits
lots of
into all
people
of
are
this?
talking about Africa, of course. I know there was a lot of anger in London because at the UN General Assembly, lots of African countries chose to abstain and refused to criticize Russia. And I gather that African opinion is tended to tilt towards Russia as well. At least this is what some people in the media here are saying. So there's been a lot of anger about this. A scramble for Africa?
China's already there, aren't they? I mean,
already there. I was going to say. I mean, I think that in any such a scramble, China already are pretty much tied it all down, I'd say.
Yeah. And let's face facts. As somebody from Latin America, Latin America, South America, and Africa will always be backwaters. They will always be backwaters. And I'm not saying this with any kind of animosity towards Africans, just as I'm not saying it with any sort of animosity towards Central or South Americans. But, at least in South America, we'll produce occasional great writers and great artists in different venues, but it's never going to be, Latin America will never be a powerhouse, and Africa less so, because they haven't up to this point over the last 300-400 years. So to claim that they will at some point is to just sort of like have be up in magical thinking, as far as I'm concerned.
Raphael says this is the damnedest of politicians in power. Very true, Raphael. Sparky says no argument there. Sparky says high food prices especially hurt large families families, and birth rates are already too low in the West.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely true.
Yes.
But
Very
Russia has those problems. I mean, they've been battling with the birth rate problem for
absolutely, yeah.
a while. They had a handle on it for a little bit. Then
The whole birth rate thing, there are some thinkers who put a lot on it, but it's very easy to get around. And also, what happens is if you have a sudden burst of self-confidence in the population, all of a sudden you will have a baby boom. Okay, and if this concludes successfully from the point of view of the Russians, it will be a shot of adrenaline into the body politic of Russia, and it will translate into changes into what's going on with the people there. So a military victory changes, people's attitudes quite a bit, especially when it's a military victory that does not actually harm the country, like what happened in the United States after the Second World War.
That is actually a very good point. Also happened in Germany, by the way, after the 1870 war. There was a huge surge in the German birth because there was this great sense of optimism and rediscovery of confidence or discovery of confidence. And it was another factor that consolidated Germany's position in the end as the rising power in Europe.
Yeah, exactly.
And Green Vibe says for Africa it depends on who's running the country. That's true. And Brazil is already a powerhouse.
Yeah.
And Brazil is already a powerhouse. Very, very interesting comment. Andrew says this is part of the Great Reset to create the necessary roadblock that justifies shortages, crashing the global economy and currencies, selling it to the public as all Russia's fault. You hear that narrative a lot too.
Yeah, I hear that now. Everyone hears that now. I can see it. I have to say, I just don't feel that if it had been planned, it would have been done in this botched way. But anyway, and they really be going, as you said at the start of the program, to people like Maduro and Khamenei and asking them to help them if they'd planned it all out in advance.
Yeah, I think that's the giveaway. Would they go to Maduro and beg Maduro to help?
No.
No.
Maduro.
Divine Surgeon says, I tried buying Russian standard vodka at CVS earlier. It was in stock, but apparently I cannot buy it because 11 states have banned it.
Wow. Hey, by the way, it's not been easy to get Russian vodka in some parts of London for a long, long time now. I mean, I used to drink Beluga, which is Russian vodka, and you can still find it. I mean, it's not entirely vanished, but it's not nowhere. Before 2014 or before the sanctions really came, it was quite accessible, available. Hasn't been for a while now, and in my part of London, it's basically Polish vodka or standard, which.
at a theater custom-built within the walls of Karazhan. The troupe, one of 3 shows at random for me each week. Strangely, it was never the one I wanted to see.
Isn't, I believe, well, it does exist, but it's not all standard vodka, I believe, is made in Russia.
City says that we're getting into Africa by signing military contracts in order to pretend Westerners from eliminating political leaders and destabilizing the countries.
I mean,
I think I'm in the
Yeah.
chat, and definitely I think the consensus is that China, to a large extent, in Africa, China and perhaps Russia could stabilize things. Maybe the right way to
I suppose
say it,
so.
or people are very positive about
Yeah.
the role China is playing. I don't know, Chad, if that's the correct interpretation. That's Africa is positive with the role of China. Let's see. Conscious Gentile says, "Thank God for the." Raphael says, "When I see what is happening now in Europe, the world has not progressed much. Slavery can be reinstated in a minute, and people will accept it."
I have to say, I too have been shocked by the kind of hysteria and the way in which we've been led along over the last few days, weeks. I mean, it has been for me a moment of real revelation. It's told me how easy it is to manipulate people. Intellectually, I've always known it, but it's so shocking to experience.
And Anatoly says, "How will steel production and supply be affected?"
Great question. Russia being, of course, a major steel producer as well, by the way, and neon gas, which I was talking about at the start of the program, which is part of the which is used in semiconductor manufacture, being a byproduct of the steel industry, the Russian steel industry. So anyway, I think everything is going to be affected because steel production is extremely energy intensive. So even if you have iron ore in lots of places, if energy prices are rising, then that's going to increase the cost of everything, including steel. And of course, steel is enormously important in every part of the manufacturing economy.
Oh, no, says Alex Alexander, "Thank you for your service. Gonzalo, resist, stay safe, and in good health. Please inform us about yourself, and don't let haters get you."
Oh, yeah, so true.
Thank you for that. Divine Insurgent says, "Do any of you remember the publication International Herald Tribune before it was acquired by the New York Times? My father enjoyed
I used to read it every day. Once
remember it.
upon a time. That was when, who knows, long ago now, it seems.
David asks, "Is there a Serbian component to any of this?"
I don't think so. I think there's a lot of support for Russia in Serbia, and Serbia's held the line on sanctions.
Raphael says, "The State Department truly believe that winning the social media war will help them more. This is insane. Facebook and Twitter was reality." Wow.
Yeah.
Good comment. Conscious says, "John 316, JW Moore, thank you for super chat." Raphael says, "I read an article a long time ago. The Panama Canal is the biggest strategic mistake made by the USA. Russia simply has to bomb it." That's not. East Coast will be flooded. Pacific is higher than Atlantic Ocean.
Let's not go to those places, please.
Let's not go. Thank you for that super chat, Raphael. John, thank you for your super chat. Kite Wayne says, "How unlikely is it that this situation is orchestrated by artificial intelligence? If it would happen, would it not happen like this?
I don't
do
think
that.
so.
I don't think so.
I think.
Whoever's orchestrating this is not. I would take the part out of the artificial. Rayo says, I joined late. Feel like Numpty. Hope you guys are keeping well and are well.
We are keeping well, thanks.
Thank you for that. Super Sparky, thank you for that. Ellen, thank you for your super sticker. Arnold, thank you for your super. Guy says, I already read that. Coach Red Pill is the perfect to describe in the midwit. Yes. David Murch says, we see people who make Renaud and Chamberlain look smart and intelligent. India sanctions is the start. Is the start bombing Baku moment.
Yeah. Yeah, start bombing Baku moment. I think, does that refer to the event?
Is the strat bombing.
I'm not sure I understand that.
But
Yeah.
the first part
The
I
war-
understand.
Was
People
the-
like Chamberlain look.
I mean, there was a campaign in 1939 during the Russo-Soviet-Finnish War of 1939, what's sometimes referred to as the Winter War, which was a campaign in Britain and France to bomb Baku, the capital of Azerbaijan, but it was in those days part of the Soviet Union and it was a major oil-producing area. So the British and the French, incredibly, being already at war with Germany, were floating all kinds of extraordinary plans to come to Finland's help. And one of those was to bomb Baku. And the historian A.J. Taylor, who I used to know, I mean, not personally, but I used to attend lectures. I remember him saying that was the single most dangerous moment for the British and the French in the second, for the Allies in the Second World War, because if they did that crazy thing of Baku, then well, we would have been at war simultaneously with the Soviet Union and Germany, which just doesn't even begin to bear thinking about. So I presume that's what this refers to. It is indeed the case that if you go back and read the media articles, the British newspapers of that period, and you also read the memoirs of people like Ivan Maisky, the Soviet ambassador to London, and all the British memoirists of that time, that the hysteria over the Soviet war with Finland in 1939 was incredible. It was even worse in some ways than what happened.
Didn't see that we lost coach.
Yes, we did lose coach. I sent you a message. About it.
Jeez.
But
Sorry, Gonzalo.
Don't worry about it.
I don't have that window open, so I couldn't see.
Don't worry about it.
But as I say, it even exceeded in some ways. The anger at the time, the West, even exceeded that of Germany's attack on Poland. So maybe that's the comparison that's being made here. I'm not absolutely sure. But yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. Kurt says, agree that our politicians will not admit mistakes, but they are good at blaming other politicians. Thus, a rollback can only happen with new politicians.
Yeah. We would need a complete change in our political class in the West. And in the West, I'm afraid, the one thing the political class is extremely good at is clinging on. It is extremely successful at isolating and marginalizing all critics and dissenters.
I think that the Trump administration had Trump actually not desired to be liked by this political class, but had actually tried to revamp and refresh the political class, there might have been some hope. But that moment is gone, and I think especially the political leadership class in the West, they will never allow another Brexit moment. They will never allow another Trump-type candidate to take over. And so the possibilities of renewal are gone. And that's my thinking at this point. And I think to carry out some sort of legalistic arrangement whereby they prevent any kind of refresh or revamp of the current leadership class. I think that's what they're supposed to do.
I entirely agree.
And they've said as much. And Gonzalo, they've admitted it. They'll never allow a Trump or Brexit moment to happen again.
No.
They've been open about it. Nas says, happy to say I can see key videos, and I'm in the USA.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Graham, thank you for super chat. Attila, thank you for that super sticker. Sparky said, Gonzalo's old academia, they're bird brains now.
Yes.
In industry, I guess, yeah.
No,
I have
it, you know, the quality of people at the elite level has so deteriorated.
shows at random
Um,
each week.
I remember the Time magazine writer William A. Henry wrote a book called In Defense of Elite. This book came out in the early 90s. I remember reading it, and I completely agreed. I have no bones to say it. I'm a snob. I like to surround myself with intelligent, capable people of industry and intellect. But
Yeah.
the current crop of elites are just so pathetic. They're so incompetent and so cautious and compliant.
Yeah.
It's so depressing. They're
Yes.
not a leadership class that you would follow even to the
No.
corner drugstore. You know what I mean?
I agree.
Yeah.
I
And
agree.
Sparky says academia now rewards rot memory, not reason. Very
Yes.
true. Hammer says Wilson threatens Zelensky, not deal with Russia.
Oh yes, I think that's exactly the problem that we're facing. That I think that these thugs, the Azov battalion and other steps within the Zelensky regime, they realize that Russia has their